An Untraveled Road by Nyan Zangetsu, Chapter 3, Here There Be Monsters. Let me tell you something you already know. The world ain't all sunshine and rainbows. It's a very mean and nasty place, and I don't care how tough you are, it will beat you to your knees and keep you there permanently if you let it. You, me, or nobody is gonna hit as hard as life. But it ain't about how hard you hit. It's about how hard you get hit and keep moving forward. To how much you can take and keep moving forward. That's how winning is done. But you've got to take the hits. When the world hits you, hit back. If it tries to beat you down, knock it right on its smug ass. Take everything it has and laugh. That's what it means to live. Modify the Rocky quote. Here there be monsters. Willow, Summer, Willow. Willow's eyes lit up like sparks. A small body all but launched itself forward. Summer Rose was a white-cloaked, ballistic, heat-seeking missile in human form. There could be no escape. Once she locked onto you, that was it. You were screwed. Willow couldn't think of any other explanation for her old friend when she cannoned into her and launched onto her chest like a limpet. To this day, she still wasn't sure what her friend's semblance was. It could be speed-based, but it was but may bloody well be super strength. Both even. Gods, the girl hugged hard. How could someone so small be so strong? No. More importantly, what are you doing here? I missed you. The dark-haired girl beamed, as though it explained everything. Did you miss me? I gathered that, Willow said as she wriggled free with a grunt. And yes, I did miss you, but why are you here? To her credit, Summer managed to look sheepish, which she wasn't, ever. Well, that's a long story, she tilted her head. Why are you here? By the brothers. This girl was going to drive her mad. Willow sighed with the patience of one who knew Summer Rose all too well. Summer, this is Atlas. I live here, remember? Oh, right. The smaller girl knuckled her head. Oops. A faint smile tugged at Willow's lips. You are still such a dolt. Willow Schnee's acquaintance with Summer Rose was formed from a chance meeting year ago when father took her to Vale for business. Be it by chance, a happenstance, or just bad bloody luck on her part, she'd bumped into a mousy little girl with a fascination for all things weaponry. At the time, she'd been agonizing over what kind of weapon she wanted to use. On a whim, Willow suggested a scythe. Said girl had promptly declared that they were besties till the end of the time, and there would be no takebacks. In the end, they'd exchanged numbers and kept in contact. Willow wouldn't call it friendship, more like long-distance pen pals across continents. Aw, you did miss me. All right, definitely a friendship, though she'd never admit it. Down, Summer, she growled, turning red. You know I don't do hugs. Summer's arrival served as a harsh reminder for Willow. If she wanted to pursue her dream of being a huntress, she would need to do it soon. Having already delayed too long, Summer had a team of her own now. Young as they were, sooner or later she would have to make a decision between running the SDC or pursuing a career in her own field. But now was not the time for such thoughts. No, the dark-haired huntress wilted her head as Willow poked her nose. Stop distracting me. I'm asking why you are here in the lab. She gestured grandly to the enclosed space around them. Answer, please. Oh, that's simple. Osmond brought me and my team with him. Summer chirped. Say, where's the guy who fell out of the sky? She perked past her. No avail. Is he here too? Osmond said he would be here. Maybe on one of the lower floors. Osmond. Something clicked in the back of Willow's head. Aha! She reared back. So that's what this is about. Wait. Summer's face turned ashen as their friend advanced upon her. You've got it all wrong. No, wait. Lilo, hurts. Too little, too late. Willow seized her friend's cheeks with all her might and pinched, stretching and pulling the poor girl's face from side to side as one might a rubber band. Summer bore with it about as well as one might expect from a girl her age, meaning she whined a lot. Not that she could escape. You've got a lot of nerds showing up out of the blue like this unannounced, messy. Summer may have wailed, but her smile never faded. I'm not sorry. You will be when I'm through with you. Why was Willow here? Because she wanted to be. Because father kept his promises. Because Naruto was going stir-crazy being cooped up in the mansion, and she didn't trust him alone with father. They had come here, the three of them, to meet Arthur and get her companion fitted for an artificial arm. It was meant to be a simple series of tests conducted by Arthur against a few mechanical soldiers away from prying eyes. A refresher to bring Naruto back to speed. At least that was the intention, because her so-called fiancé, actually was somewhere down below preparing for the next phases of testing as their guest looked on, which meant he got to escape this awkwardness while she was left to suffer and field questions in his place. She'd get him back for that. See how he liked the Summer tackle to the chest? No, wait, that wasn't a good idea. Summer seemed entirely too eager to meet him. As for the rest of her team, a harsh crunch below them heralded the arrival of the man in question. All right, her false fiancé shouted from somewhere below them. Let's get this show on the road. Willow sighed. Nothing was ever simple where Naruto Uzumaki was involved. She should have accepted that truth long ago. No, perhaps the fault lay with her at this time. She had failed to anticipate several things today. The first was Arthur's enthusiasm. Who would have thought the man would go so far as to procure life grim for this test? The second was Father's connection and the fact that he might have talked about the boy who fell from the sky. The third proved to be the lab itself. She thought it would be a little more than a small enclosure in a room somewhere. One entrance, one exit, no surprises, no one way to sneak up on them, no unannounced arrivals, nothing. Don't tell me, she groaned. You came to poach Naruto, didn't you? Summer perked up like an eager puppy. Oh, is that his name? Willow flicked her forehead. No, Pat Summer. She'd misjudged them. This building consisted of 3 large floors with separate entrances for each, one for the entrance and labs, another for testing where scientists could observe, and a third leading to the roof. Summer and her team had come traipsing through the latter without warning, almost as if they'd expected her, as if they'd known. Father hadn't been surprised, if anything. Nicholas Schnee was delighted to see them, but that was absurd that was absurd. Father would never go behind her back like this. Surely not. Huh. A rough voice drawled to her right as she leaned against the rail. Is that the bastard down there? He doesn't look like much. Bet I could take him. Crow. Summer's elbow silenced it like with a squawk. Be nice. You haven't even met him yet. All right, short stack. Don't hit so hard. Willow flicked a wary glance at Crow Bronwyn and felt her lip curl. Rude brute. She disliked him from the start. She supposed the same could be said of his sister Raven, hadn't spoken so much as a word since she met her. Summer had hinted that the Bronwyn twins were from a remote village or some such. They acted like former bandits, so uncivilized. At least Taiyang Xiaolong was polite enough to nod when she glanced at him. Huh, handsome fellow, that one. She liked Naruto better, and there was the Goliath in the room. Ospen, headmaster of Beacon Academy, currently chatting up Father and laughing with him as if he were an old friend, which he was. She didn't miss the way he kept glancing down at Naruto and Arthur in the test zone below. Something told her it wasn't what he was interested in. He might be one of the greater minds in Atlas, but it was also something of a known quantity. Naruto was not. The boy who fell from the sky. Willow palmed her face. Of course, that would catch Ospen's attention. His curiosity more so. Father had likely mentioned it in passing and said curiosity had drawn him here. But why bring Summer and her team? It didn't make any sense. She'd only met the headmaster a handful of times, enough to be wary of him. Still, she knew Father's friendship with him was a tight one and couldn't bring herself to interfere. She didn't know what the two of them had got up to behind closed doors with their meetings, and frankly, she didn't want to. It was only natural that he would have passed the news along. That shouldn't have bothered her. Yet, it did. The realization that followed. More so. Don't tell me, she groaned at Summer. He came to poach Naruto for Beacon, didn't he? Her friend perked up like an eager egg. Well, Tai swooped in to swat her arm. No, bad Summer. Spoiled sport. I'm not that bad. You are. Answer the question. Willow smiled at the byplay, but there was a hint of ice in her eyes. Is Ospen here for him or not? And to think, she hadn't anticipated an ambush at all, least of all one by an old friend, much less for said friend to drag her entire team and the headmaster of Beacon with her, or perhaps it was the other way around this time. This was not how Willow had thought to meet Ospen again, or the rest of Team Stark, with any of them, but seeing an old friend again, she wouldn't trade this for the world. Yep, Summer chirped, popping the pea with a loud smack. I mean, it's not every day someone falls out of the sky. Do you think you can fly? And there went her good mood again. She twitched. No, I'm fairly certain he can't. Summer wrinkled her nose. Then did he fall out of the sky or not? Again with that question. What do you think, Ray? If he's strong, then he's strong. Raven shrugged, finally speaking for the first time as she responded to Summer. If he's weak, then he's weak. We'll find out soon enough. Summer gulped. And if he's strong, then I will attempt to kill him. The faintest hint of a smile crossed Raven's face. We shall see. Well, that solidified Willow's opinion of Raven Bronwyn. Jury was still out on the boys, but she knew precisely what to think of this girl, bitch. She absolutely didn't let her disdain she obviously didn't let the disdain show. Schnee were above such petty displays. Summer was someone whose opinion, if not generally disposition, she would gladly entertain. Raven was certainly no friend of hers. Ty seemed tolerable if she was honest with herself. Crow, would Summer be mad if she stabbed him? Just a little. Probably. She was still considering her approach when Arthur Watts finally deigned to climb the steps and join them. My apologies for the delay. Time waits for no man, it seems. As ever, he was the picture of decorum, dressed in a simple tan suit, pausing only once to note Osmond's presence. His eyes widened briefly before he managed to mask his surprise. Indeed, he did a far better job of it than Willow had. His mustache only twitched once as he took in the whole of Team Stark. No doubt he appreciated this unexpected opportunity and the press it provided. It wasn't every day the headmaster of Beacon dropped in for a visit. If he thought anything of Summer and her team, he did little to show it. Summer stuck her tongue out at his retreating back. After a pointed moment of consideration, he moved to stand beside her and father. He showed solidarity in that, if nothing else. Watts was an eccentric sort, but he was loyal to those who appreciated his work. Judging by his pleased expression, Naruto had just joined that short list. Good. He needed all the allies he could get. How is he? Nicholas inquired. He's quite ready, the prodigy beamed. A hollow clang echoed below, punctuated by a roar. Nicholas couldn't help but preen at their expectant faces. Just a little. Shall we begin then? Willow offered a silent prayer to the gods that this spectacle wouldn't end in disaster. Oh, who was she kidding? Of course it would. So that's a Grim, huh? All told, Naruto had expected it to be bigger. Psst. Kurama agreed with a snort. People fear these things. I could eat that wolf in a single bite. Naruto was half tempted to agree. Oh, the creature before them was large enough to be sure. An impressive 7-foot tall specimen of black fur and white bone hammering against the barrier between them. Even from this distance he saw it, and it saw him. Even from this distance he saw it, and it saw him. Those beady red eyes followed his every movement. Its slavery jaw cracked wide as it stood tall on its hind legs. It knew he was there, and it wanted out. He could feel the rage radiating from it, from it in palpable waves. Violence and the hate steaming from the beast like a dark tide, and the intensity of it threatened to choke him. Who would have thought negative emotion sensing could be a bad thing? And clad in a pair of simple gray trousers and a navy blue sleeveless vest, the blonde began to pound on the balls of his bare feet as he awaited the go-ahead to begin. To think they'd asked him to wear boots in here? Boots. Ha! Perhaps in another life the sight of slavering monsters might have terrified the whiskered warrior. Now, in the last week, he'd stared down chakra monsters and a goddess. He'd fallen out of the sky and nearly died. He'd endured the horrors of wearing clothes that weren't orange and black. Monsters. His outfit was monstrous to look at. Too dull, too drab. He'd gladly face monsters rather than wear this getup, but he still didn't like looking at the Grim because it wasn't alone. Two of its kin kept lurking near the reinforced glass alongside their brother, each eyeing the juicy morsel lurking only yards away. They'd given up trying to break through the reinforced glass 5 minutes ago, but he could still see the cracks where they'd made the attempt. They knew they were going to get out, and so they had chosen to save their strength. Clever. According to his host, these specimens had proven quite difficult to capture for him. They wouldn't last very long in captivity. He were here for the express purpose of a test, nothing more. He could respect that, even if he didn't much like the reason behind it. Are you ready, my boy? A voice echoed overhead. Naruto pumped an arm towards the ceiling in agreement, both his fists. Let's do this! Nicholas Schnee was a man of his word. Only a few days after humiliating Jackish Gale, Naruto had found himself whisked away to a laboratory in the upper echelons of Atlas to be fitted for a prosthetic arm. Now he would be testing said arm. A shame, really. He would have liked to see more of the city beforehand rather than be cooped up in that mansion, but he understood the necessity of getting himself back into fighting shape before he took the world by storm. Willow had promised him a tour after this anyway, so there was that to look forward to. He hadn't expected to have an audience for said test, however. He'd seen them come in while he prepared. Naruto knew none of their faces, though he could see them from the second floor. They'd come in through one of the upper entrances while he was down here preparing for the test. Two girls, two boys, each nearly of an age with him, alongside a man with silver hair bearing a cane. Friends of Willow and Nicholas, he supposed. Not his concern. If they wanted to talk afterwards, that was more than fine with him. For now, he just wanted to get started already. Willow caught him staring and raised the hand. Naruto returned the gesture with his new addition. Luck. He didn't need luck. He was ready to put his arm through its paces. Cobalt blue metal embossed with streaks of scarlet and black, rose to wave at her, fingers idly flexing. Supposedly it was a marvel of Elysian technology, or so he'd been told. Certainly felt like it. Arthur Watts was an eccentric young man, to be sure, but he knew his stuff. His new limb fit like a glove he couldn't feel, but still, it responded to his thoughts flawlessly, fingers flexing in time with his motion and his muscles. Even now, as he made a fist, half of the man's words had flown straight over his head when he'd explained how it worked, but now to find himself pleased with it nonetheless. A metal arm was better than no arm at all. Kerma had proven more attentive and memorized the gibberish that followed, functions and all. Speaking of which, he spared a glance for the room. It was something of a large square space, all reinforced glass and steel, with a second floor by which others could look down from within a protective barrier and observe, which made sense considering they were about to throw a pack of live grim at him. Watts had been the one to gather them in the first place, but he'd asked to face the beast despite everyone's concern. You want to know everything about this world, its people, those who stalked said people, everything. Robots wouldn't be a challenge. Grim would, regardless of the risk. Are you sure about this? Willow called down to him. It's not too late to back out. Huh, he preened a bit, puffing out his chest. Just wait and see. The barrier snapped down with an audible thunk. Begin the test, Watts cried. Released at last, the nearest Grim bounded forward and struck at once, but its fangs found no purchase upon the human flesh it sought. Naruto's new metal arm rose to weather the assault, half sheathed in a glowing shroud of chakra. In that moment, his grin was rather similar to his wolfish foe. With a flick of the wrist, a wall of explosive sound burst forth from a vent in the wrist, sending the towering Grim yowling backwards into a wall to stun it. It startled the blonde as well, earning a somewhat mild laugh from him. Huh, so that was what that button did. Depressed the trigger near the thumb. What's calm instruction came from above. That was a front, of course. The man had spent the last 15 minutes drilling the arm's features into him before he'd even given him the arm. Mad scientist indeed. Some of these combinations were visceral. Thankfully, he didn't mind showing off a little for the sake of his new ally. He'd proven to do this much at least, so he feigned curiosity and did as he was told. Like this. Sure enough, Naruto heard something click and the vent snapped down, replaced by a serrated blade at the wrist, rather like a kunai, but longer and sharper. All right, he could work with this. While he didn't like weapons, he'd been trained enough to use them. Still smiling, he leaped forward out and swept the Beowulf's head clean off of its shoulders. Watts cheered something up above, no doubt taking a moment to espouse how useful his creation was in dispatching the Grim. Naruto paid him little mind and lunged at the second, fingers clicking into a different formation. Either unwilling or unable to learn from the mistakes of its fallen comrade, the second Grim fared little better. It tried to meet his charge head on. A subtle pulse of chakra triggered the arm's mechanism again, and its ill-advised rush stalled against the shield. Said shield soon snapped into a spear and bore through its chest. Someone squealed somewhere above, and it didn't sound like Willow at all. I want that! Why do I hear boss music? Naruto nearly missed a step and snapped a glare at the one responsible. Sure enough, a girl in a white cloak leaned over the railing above, silver eyes wide. There were others up there with her, but they weren't all but throwing themselves over the railing to stare at him. She caught him gaping and waved. Hi! Awkwardly, he raised his arm to wave back. Hello? Summer! Willow snatched her back with a hiss. Stop that! The remaining Grim looked about as baffled as Naruto felt, so much so that it hadn't attacked. Naruto shrugged hopelessly and took on a ready stance. It perked up noticeably when he beckoned at it with a low whistle. Here, boy! With a lopping roar, The beast bounded at him rather than take its assault head on. The blonde ran up the nearest wall he could find. Sure enough, his legs and chakra sustained him. Someone gasped behind him, and the sound stretched his grin to sharkish proportions. Was he showing up? Was she showing up? Perhaps, just a little. He couldn't help himself at the moment. He was just too damn giddy to care for the repercussions of his actions. How long had it been since he'd had a chance to stretch his legs? Too long, so he kept running until he hit the ceiling. Then he ran some more. Finally, he came to a halt well above his prey. Hanging upside down, he tensed his body into a crouch and coiled himself like a spring. Finish it or show off. Kurama grinned. I'd advise the latter. Naruto laughed. Really? Someone's perky today. Am I? In his mind's eye, the fox rolled over and presented him with a shit-eating grin. We have an audience today, and I'd wager most of them, bar Willow and her father, think you're nothing more than some unlucky cripple. What's wrong with putting a few mortals in their place? Hey, mortal right here, Naruto sulked. Yes, but I find you tolerable. Reliable as ever, the prosthetic arm produced a soft whine when he flung it outward and made a fist, just as Watts had instructed, to trigger another function. A vicious axe sprang forth from the mechanism in the palm to replace his hand. Another flex created a spark, wreathing the edge in flame. Naruto tested it for a moment, gauging the weight in hefta-like, perhaps a bit heavier than he was used to, but he'd wielded worse before. In a seamless movement, he swept the weapon behind his back. Then he blurred. In his base form, it would have been the simplicity itself to simply drop from the ceiling and decapitate the creature. Naruto chose not to, and willingly activated his cloak instead. He held it and sent a pulse of golden chakra to his legs, causing the ceiling to buckle beneath him as he pushed off at an angle and slammed into a wall. Sure enough, the Beowulf tracked the movement. Not so what followed. Kurama must have realized what he was up to, because he absolutely cackled in the back of his head. Naruto married his words through thought for thought. Together, they shot forward like a meteor. Let the games begin! To its credit, the Beowulf tried to dodge. It really, truly did. It did not succeed at all, and yipped in surprise as the jerky shot past to rack across its flank with the axe. Honed claws tore through empty air as a second streak of gold slashed across its chest. Then another, a third, fourth, fifth. Each pass sent Naruto searing through the grim to alight against another solid surface, only to tense and bolt up back against the moment he made contact. Each swipe tore another hole in the Grim's hide. Each tear left the poor creature reeling like a body drunkard at last call. Left, right, center. Naruto didn't much care which way he went. Each leap inevitably brought him back to his prey. His body caromed wildly off the ceiling and the floors and walls alike. Every strike constantly moving, still more than a golden flash to deal to those present in such a confined space. His speed made him king, and the king showed no mercy. In the end, the Grim never stood a chance. It was only just beginning to look up again when the axe finally came howling down on its head. Naruto landed atop its decaying corpse and rode its head to the floor. With a delighted whoop. He was smiling. He realized, laughing. It felt good to cut loose again after being cooped up for a week. Humming in soft satisfaction, he raised his false arm with a small chuckle. And that's how it's done. The shinobi boomed a laugh. I think I'm in love, Kurama purred. We're keeping this thing. On that much they agreed. Arthur, he called up, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Brilliant, bloody good show. If a young Arthur Watts preened at the praise they'd given him, Naruto didn't notice, or perhaps he did. Who can say? He was far too busy shouting and singing their praises for the world Hopper to get a good read on him anyway. Instead, both tailed beast and human alike settled in to watch the young genius descend the steps with vicious haste, eyes agleam. There, he could get a better fix on him now, and that was most certainly a glimmer of pride and self-satisfaction burning his gaze now. Nothing wrong with that. He saw no harm in offering him his artificial arm. Ah, you made a friend. Shut up, Whiskers, Naruto sighed. Watts latched onto the arm. Really needed a name for this thing, like a proud uncle. Then came the questions, as he had expected. That was incredible. That speed, those rapid shifts. Did you plan that? No, wait, don't answer. I don't want to know. A hand snapped up before Naruto could answer, and the blonde allowed the scientist to prattle on with a bemused smile. That was perfect. You made quite a show in there, in front of the Schnee family and Ospen himself. Ha! I'd like to see Ironwood ignore my project now once he hears of this. Naruto tilted his head. Ironwood? Never heard of him? Waltz cackled. And that, my friend, makes this victory all the sweeter. He'll take notice of us after this. Mark my words. Us? Watts thought of him as a friend then, if not an ally. Was that a good thing? Naruto couldn't be sure he would have sensed any ill intent on the man's part. No, it merely felt like he had something to prove. Fine by him. He was used to being the underdog these days. By who the devil was Ironwood, and why did he have the terrible feeling he just trod on his toes? Shrugging it off, he beamed without a hint of gall. The arm works just fine. You did good work. I knew you'd like it. His new ally pulled a holographic diagram for him to inspect. Now then, how do you feel about a grappling hook? How do I feel? Blue eyes lit up like a blaze. I feel strongly about it. What else you got? I want to put this puppy through her paces while we can, you know. Shall I forward the details to your scroll then? Naruto dug the device out of his trouser pocket and grimaced at the silver blue casing. He barely knew how to use it at all, and at first tried to refuse, only to have the scroll forced on him all the same. According to Nicholas, who insisted that he called him Dad, it was the latest model or some such. Willow had programmed it with her number alongside several others. She even taught him to use the blasted thing to a varying degree, but he loathed it all the same. Why use something like that when you could just talk to someone face to face? This world was weird. Can we just talk about it now? He begged hopefully as he buried the device once more. Don't make me use the scroll, Watts. It's evil. And yet you accepted that arm? The scientist arched an eyebrow. Well, yeah, the arm's a weapon. I can use an arm. I can't use a bloody phone. Capital. The scientist beamed, happier for the praise as he pulled up another screen with a flick of the fingers. I've already drawn up a few designs you might be interested in. The sky's the limit, as they say. For example, if you look here, there's more than enough possibilities for another mecha shift, or even, excuse me, whatever Watts might have said died a sputtering death as a whirling dervish, white and silver, thrust itself between them with a determined shout. Naruto jerked backwards. Watts wasn't quite quick enough and found himself caught by the collar of his jacket. Ouch! He almost pitied the man. In the short time that he'd come to know him, he'd realized a very cruel truth about Arthur. He did not like people in his personal space, least of all when said people barely came up to his chest and started chatting away like a deranged chipmunk. That was amazing. Summer Rose beamed up at him with eyes full of life and light. I want one of those arms. Make me one. What? Watts reeled under the verbal assault, pride wearing with incredulity. What you need, but you don't need it. Don't care. Summer pushed her forehead against his with a growl. Make me one. Watts flailed spectacularly. Help me, he mouthed at Naruto. The blonde shook his head rapidly. Not a chance. Yes, well, Watts rallied with a desperate smile. It was quite difficult for me to make. Then he threw him under the bus. Perhaps Naruto would be a better person to ask. He knows the mechanisms far more intimately than I. The blonde blanched. Liar, traitor, trickster. Really, in that case, Summer's gaze snapped to Naruto, a guided missile ready to launch while Watts took the opportunity to scurry back to the balcony. Hey, Whiskers, can I borrow your arm pretty please? What? Naruto squawked at the betrayal as much as the silver-eyed girl. No, buzz off. I promise I'll give it back. Summer wrinkled happily. Once again, no. Naruto clutched the shinobi prosthetic to his chest. Suddenly, wary of this woman and her sparkling silver eyes, it wasn't fear that compelled him to do so, rather self-preservation. Something told him this little hellion would not hesitate to rip it right off of him if she thought she could get a hold of it. He was certain she was harmless. He knew he could fight her off if worse came to worse. No, he knew he could. That wasn't question, and yet something told him to fear Summer Rose. I need an adult, Kurama whimpered. No, we need an adult. I think she qualifies as one, Naruto shot back. In what world? Came the roar. Down, short stack. Thankfully, a young man with dark hair swooped in to flick the girl's forehead, driving her back. Summer recoiled with a small whine. Naruto saw his chance for what it was and bolted. Willow met him halfway, descending the steps two at a time to link her arms in his. Her apologetic expression told him all he needed to know, more so as the Schnee angled her body to keep herself firmly between him and this crazy lass. Who or what is that? He hissed, all but hiding behind the Schnee hairs. Where did she come from? That would be Summer. To her credit, Willow recognized his plight and winced. She's a friend. Well, your friend tried to take my arm off, Naruto bit back. Care to explain that? Her pinched expression grew more strained. She is enthusiastic. No kidding, he deadpanned. Never would have guessed. Willow flashed him a dark look and tugged him back half a pace as the rest of Summer's estranged team descended the steps. Naruto allowed it, allowing him to focus on the newcomer, the better to assess her and get a feel for her emotions before the rest could swarm him. Emotions? What emotions? Summer was light. There were so many words for her that he couldn't think of them all. If Willow was determined, then this girl was pure energy, hope and happiness personified, wrapped around a core of molten steel. There wasn't so much as a shred of doubt or darkness in her heart. The light burned all that away. This girl would fight for those she loved. She'd gladly give her life for them. She also wanted to make sweet, sweet love to his artificial arm after she stole it. Wait, where had that thought come from? Naruto wasn't even sure how he knew that, but he had a suspicion. He stole a glance for the mark on his fleshy palm and frowned when he saw it pulse a faint shade of angry red. What are you doing to me? Perhaps it had something to do with Sasuke's death and the trauma it brought him. Perhaps it was the new mark he'd been given. Perhaps it had evolved somehow, allowing him to sense positive emotions alongside the negative. Who knew? This ability wasn't mind reading by any measure, but it was a close second. He didn't want it, not when it made him read people like a book. Willow elbowed his side, claiming his attention and concern once more. Listen very carefully. Her stern words claimed his attention instantly. My father brought these people here. No, don't give me that look. I don't know why. She flicked his forehead when he tried to protest. I think he wanted them to see what you were capable of. The brooding girl over there is Raven. The blonde next to her is Tai Yang. The last one is Crow. You've already met Summer. Try not to kill any of them. I'd be very cross with you. He nodded, but something must have shown in his expression because her visage softened and she started stroking his arm instead. Are you alright? Her words were softer, the facade dropping for him. Father's got them distracted for the time being. We could leave if you like. Naruto considered it strongly. A thorn of hesitation held him back. Who's the geezer with your old man? Blast it, I forgot about him. Willow sucked in a breath, made sure the man wasn't watching, and leaned closer. That would be Osmond, headmaster of Beacon Academy. I don't know him nearly as well as I'd like to. Avoid him if you can. I think he might try to poach you for his school. No, thank you. The words were a bit louder than he intended and drew immediate attention to them. I want to stay here with you. Her cheeks turned rosy and her fingers curled around his. That is very sweet of you. Hey there, loverbirds. Got a sec? On a whim, Naruto turned his gaze to the newcomer, Crow. He recalled his name, who had just called out to them. Naruto tried not to look. He really and truly did, but his new power betrayed him. His stomach roared at what he found there. Anxiety, a veritable ocean of it, enough to drown in. Stress and regret piled high atop each other, bundled up in a tight little ball masked behind a pained smile he never let anyone see. Torn loyalties, family and friendship. This one would have to make a choice sooner or later. His fate would hinge on it, as would those of his unborn nieces. Nieces, what the hell? Again with the knowing of things he shouldn't? What was happening to him? Sorry about Summer. Naruto blinked at the words as he found the younger of the Brownwind twins offering him a hand. She gets excited when it comes to weapons. He jerked a thumb over his shoulder to where a man in tan leather was visibly restraining the eager girl. Tai and Ray are working on that. A little help here, said Blonde yelped. Nah, you've got her. Tai was, actually a pretty decent fellow, all things considered. His emotions were an open book for Naruto to read at his leisure. He cared for his teammates, all of them, perhaps a little too much. Now, there was a revelation he could have done without. Not that he was judging. Nope, guy could do his own thing and leave him well out of it. He wanted no part of that mess, or the dark-haired woman who was suddenly looking at him like he was a piece of meat. At least she seemed too busy holding Summer down for now. Nope. Naruto ignored it and deleted all thoughts of it from his brain, not touching that subject with a 10-foot pole. kinky. A low whistle bounced off his ears. Karma, I will end you. Seeking an escape, he turned his attention back to Crow and lied through his teeth. I didn't get your name. Crow Bronwyn. A roguish grin flashed at him. Nice to meet you. Now the newcomer was talking to him. Damn it, he'd engaged them without thinking to get away from Kurama's laughter. So much for their sweet escape. Naruto wanted to cry. Was it too late to just chuck his arm at Summer and bolt? That was beginning to seem a preferable alternative to being dragged about like this. It wasn't that he was angry at them. Far from it. Everyone here just had so much personality. He found himself overwhelmed by it, coming from someone like him that was saying something. Don't worry about it. So he plastered on a smile he didn't feel and willed himself to shake the man's hand. Just keep her away from my arm. Ha! That actually drew a chuckle out of the young man. Can't make any promises there. What Summer wants, Summer gets. Not always. Willow clutched his arm just a little tighter. Something clicked in the back of Naruto's mind. Wait a minute. Willow was jealous. Even he wasn't so dense as to miss her petulant expression, the slight shifting on her hips as she leaned into him. But why and of what? Summer, he'd barely spoken a few sentences to the girl. Most of those had been him trying to fend off her grabby hands. Surely she wasn't jealous of Crow. Naruto had the strangest feeling the man would make a good friend. Stop spacing out. Kurama jabbed him. Must I do everything for you? Answer him. He's obviously waiting for you to respond. Naruto wrinkled his nose in mild annoyance. Well, little Miss Silver Eyes won't be getting me and my arm without a fight. The faintest sliver of understanding dawned in Crow's face. Gaze. Good to hear. So, you and the Ice Queen, huh? Willow made angry willow noises. Don't call me that, bird brain. Naruto snorted. He couldn't help himself. His body betrayed him, and the moment he heard the words, Ice Queen, it was funny if only because it didn't fit. Not at all. He knew Willow. Her icy persona was every bit a facade, one she had constructed with the utmost of care. She loathed it. In private, she was stubborn and fuzzy, proud and determined, and kind. She'd give you the very clothes off her back. Willow saw his expression and scowled. Not you too. I wasn't agreeing with him, Naruto replied. You're too warm to be an ice queen. And Crow whistled. Smooth talker, this one. Sure enough, his ally turned a bright, cheery red at that remark, leaving him to wonder if she had misread his intentions again. Damned words and their double meanings. Still, he'd made her happy, hadn't he? That was a good thing, right? It would make their spar all the more enjoyable later. Wait, why the devil was Crow smirking at the two of them? What did he see? What did he know? Pretty impressive display earlier, the brown one said instead. Choosing to skirt the subject entirely, Naruto let him. Where did you train? Places. Willow responded just a touch too quickly for him. Now it was Naruto's turn to glower. Places, huh? No one smirked, tugged at Crow's mouth. Never heard of it. Mostly self-taught. Naruto heated him off at the pass before he could press her further. It wasn't a lie. Most of what it had been on his own. He had good teachers. Just because he'd spilled the beans to Willow didn't mean he was willing to tell everyone his grand secret. Honestly, he wished Nicholas had said anything at all, but he knew the man meant well, at least in his own bumbling way. Willow's father was probably trying to help him make friends. Naruto respected that, if nothing else. Might I have a word, Crow? He wasn't sure if he could say the same for Aspen. Try as he might, Naruto couldn't get a solid read on the man when he approached them. While the members of Team Stark he'd seen thus far were very much an open book to his newfound gift, this man was a vault, sealed shut. Which meant one of two things. Austin was either actively masking his emotions for some reason, or he simply couldn't read them. He wasn't sure which was worse, or if that was even a bad thing. The idea of being able to read people like this, he didn't like it. Felt too personal. If he was going to live with his new ability, he'd have to master it, learn to turn it on and off at the very least. Reluctantly, he accepted the hand in good faith. That was a truly impressive display, the man said. I'll be frank, we'd love to have someone like you in Beacon. Willow absolutely hissed. Now, old friend. Nicholas came to their rescue with a laugh as he moved to stand beside them. I'm afraid the boy's already spoken for. I asked you here to see what he was capable of, not so you could recruit him. Did you? Osprey quirked a brow and pointedly ignored the second half of that. I'm quite sure Ironwood wouldn't mind. Nicholas coughed meaningfully. Not Ironwood. Willow whined. Daddy, stop. The Schnee pair, the Schnee par, the Schnee patriarch swayed on his feet. She said it again. Few seemed to catch the hint, save Crow and Ospen. Crow, at least, he felt he could trust. The man looked reliable enough and held his tongue when Naruto glowered at him. Nor were his origins the only matter of concern here. He accepted the purpose of this ruse with Willow for now, but he didn't need someone spilling secrets across the kingdom. Well, Osmond shrugged. Perhaps Miss Schnee then. Ice Blue eyes narrowed and the temperature plummeted several degrees. It was the first overt sign of anger Naruto had ever witnessed from the burly man. Nicholas held himself well. He did not snap at Ospen. He did not lose his temper. He barely even moved. Yet, despite all he'd seen and done, the blonde took a step forward in his defense. Nicholas was only half a heartbeat behind. Together, they presented a united front. Yeah, that's not happening. Quite so. My daughter's path is her own. Nicholas's words were colder than Atlas itself. She will make her own decision. Miss Schnee, Ospen ventured. Willow perked up behind them and immediately shook her head. The headmaster saw it, recognized it, and calmly ceded the field to them. A shame. In the end, he smiled and tapped his cane against the floor. Should either of you change your minds, you have but to ask. We'd be happy to have you both. Sure, Naruto muttered the word, not meaning it for a second. Willow had barely explained what the Huntsman Academies were, and while he respected them, he had no desire to visit one. Ever going back to school at his age? No, thank you. At the moment, he was more than willing to make up an excuse and escape with Willow the first chance he got. Wait, Naruto turned. What now? He growled. What else could anybody possibly want? He thought it was Summer who had spoken just now, but no, the voice was cold. Instead, he found himself face to face with bloody red eyes framed by midnight tresses that rather reminded him of a raven's wing. For a moment, just a moment, something flinched in him. No, they weren't the Sharingan or any such bloodline, though this woman was dark of hair and pale of skin. She was no Uchiha, but her features were similar enough for him to panic, and like any true predator, she'd picked up on it. He'd shown weakness, and the woman pounced on it like a starving beast. You, there, she pointed a finger at him. Fight me. Crow threw out his arms. Raven, why? She ignored her brother, pushing past him to confront Naruto. Do you accept my challenge? Who are? Naruto made the mistake of raising his gaze to meet her eyes and immediately lost himself. This woman was far too easy for him to read, if only because she wore her emotions on her sleeves. Yikes, that was just one giant tangled knot of negativity, wasn't it? This one was all anger and pride, stubborn to a fault. He sensed a burning need to prove her strength in the eyes of her peers, as well as herself. Yet that same grit was spiced with a hint of fear. Raven Bronwyn was arrogant, to be sure, but her arrogance was brittle, like glass ready to shatter against a hard punch. For all her vaunted beliefs in strength, she was weak in spirit. She was a coward at heart, unable to trust in anything but strength, and when that failed her, when the chips were down, she would run, time and time again, from her family, from her responsibility, from the world. If not turned from her path, her daughter would suffer for her mother's cowardness 10 times over, suffer greatly. Stop! Naruto grit his teeth and wrenched with his head and alike. Somehow the sharp motion of his neck was enough to sever his sixth sense. Unfortunately, this caused Raven to mistake the motion as a nod, because she drew her blade with a flourish and took on a stance. Her eyes danced with dark glee, a wide grin stretching across her face. As she brought it forward in a low sweep, Kurama made a noise of mild disgust. She reminds me entirely too much of that man. Naruto agreed wholeheartedly, even as he reeled back. Miss Bronwyn, bite me, Ospen. Ospen turned her hand to her head and spat. This isn't your affair. Raven, Summer's voice rose in warning, crackling with the faintest hint of concern. Bad idea, even for you. Yeah, maybe don't do that, sis. Crow drawled and stepped between the two of them. Little help here, Tai. Now, please. The hunter in question laid a hand on Raven's shoulder. All right, there. Let's just calm down and think this through. There's no need to. No, she snapped, and his fellow blonde flinched, as though she'd physically struck him across the face. She may as well have. Don't try to stop me, Tai. I'll not be denied this. Naruto twitched. Her attitude reminded him of a younger Sasuke, angry and hungry for power and the accolades it brought. This girl was. Not quite the same, but he found himself forming an immediate dislike of her all the same. Weakness, strength, who lived their life by such definition, who fought for the sake of fighting. Apparently this woman did. He wasn't sure he liked that. No, fighting her would have been a bad idea without all the crap he was going through. Now, it would be far too easy to stir up his emotions and do something he'd regret. I don't want to fight you, he said as much. Raven tilted her head with a grin. What's wrong? Afraid of me? Her words punched a big hole right through the brick wall of his resolve. Afraid of her? No, not at all. He was afraid of what he might do to her if he let his temper get the better of him. If there was one thing he couldn't stand, it was arrogance. Something about this girl just rubbed him the wrong way, made him want to slap the smile from her face. Don't. Willow saw what he was about to do and stepped to his side in an instant. She's baiting you. You can't afford to make a scene there. And her words were like a rush of cold water against his senses. There was a bitter irony there. If Willow, of all people, was trying to hold him back, when roused, her temper burned even hotter than his. Yet here she was, the voice of reason. Why had Nicholas said anything? He seemed almost bemused by the bickering, but he hadn't said a word for some time now. Had he known Willow would interfere? Probably. Sensing the weight of his regard, the Schnee patriarch spread his arms and stepped forward while Willow led him away. I think that's enough for today, he spoke soothingly as the two of them retreated. I can put the lot of you up in the mansion until tomorrow. Osmond smiled. Thank you for your hospitality. We'll gladly accept it. Summer and Taiyang bowed. Crow simply shrugged. They almost made it. You would have the Schnee control you. You would have the Schnee control you, Raven sneered at Naruto's retreating shoulders. Weakling, I thought you were stronger than that. Willow stilled. My name is Willow, and she has changed her mind. She released a step back thrice as sharply. Naruto, against his better judgment. Naruto turned towards his friend and arched an eyebrow. Destroy her. We can go down to Mantle once we've taken out the trash. Great. Enable me, why don't you? In hindsight, Naruto knew he could have stepped back, restrained himself, paused to reassess the situation. He really should have. Lord knew he'd drawn more than enough attention to himself already with his skill and grandstanding, but he didn't know this woman. She was a stranger to him, and moreover, she'd mocked him out of the blue and demanded a fight. For what? Seeking nothing more than to prove her strength. Under any other circumstances, pity and confusion would have stayed his hand, but her words banished any hope of that. Are you going to fight or not? Raven planted a hand on her hip and leaned forward. I don't have all day. Fight me if you dare. He'd heard them before. They haunted him. Even now, those words, those damn words. In an instant, he found himself back on the rooftop, staring into a smug visage not unlike her own. It vanished when he blinked, but the rage remained. Those bloody words. Everything had gone wrong with those damned words. If only he'd seen, if only he'd realized, but he hadn't. He'd been a blind boy, and his blindness led to his friend's death years later. He thought himself over this. Days had passed since his first breakdown, and he'd been just fine. Naruto blew out an angry, trembling breath. Don't say that. Raven stopped short, frowning. What? Don't use his words. Whose words? The blackhead scoffed. They're mine. Now shut up and fight. Raven lunged at him in response, sweeping low and hard at his legs with her katana. Naruto leaped over the blade, and for a fleeting instant, both heels alighted on the tip of the sword, leaving him glaring down at his less than pleased opponent. Her expression turned thunderous, and he flipped back off of it when she wrenched her weapon away. He wasn't surprised when she leaped at him, trying to carve a brutal crosscut into his chest. She still missed all the same. She was skilled, to be sure, but that was all. Just skilled. He'd fought gods, and this girl, despite her high opinion of herself, was no god. When her sword swung at him again, he slapped it away with a hand. Stop. The word was a growl. I won't fight you. She sneered at him. Then you're weak. Too weak to save your friend. She hadn't said that, but he'd felt it all the same. By the log, she really was just like Sasuke. Not the self-sacrificing hero he'd been at the end, but as he was before, prideful, arrogant, seeking out a fight for no reason but to test herself. She looked nothing like him, but she had his old attitude down to a T. It didn't help that she had dark hair and red eyes. Nothing would dissuade her from this fight. Not her friends, not her family, not even him. Any refusal on his part would just lead her to keep goading him. In all honesty, she had already gotten under his skin with that last remark. She sullied his memory with those words, and Naruto felt his temper blaze back as he skidded out of harm's way. Last chance, he rasped. "If you don't stop, I'll make you." Those hateful red eyes danced with euphoria. "You're welcome to try, weakling." That was all he heard before her sword slammed into his metal arm with a keening cry. He'd expected the blade to bite deep into the steel. To his surprise, it held firm. His temper less so. Blue eyes burned red. An ugly emotion reared its head in his heart all over again as he pushed back against the blade, even now bearing at his head. It wasn't even a struggle, more an annoyance, really. No, it was her. She wanted a fight. Did she? Fine, she'd get one, but not in the way she expected. What is it with girls in this world and trying to carve me up? I'm not a piece of meat. Off! Now, Raven never had a chance to respond because clenched knuckles slammed up into her chin and sent her spitting. Naruto took on a boxing stance. "You know what? Fine. I'm in a foul mood anyway. Come here, bird brain. I'll make fried chicken out of you." Raven's smile turned feral as she climbed to her feet and retrieved her weapon by the wayside. "Yes, that's the attitude I wanted to see. Fight me." When next Raven struck at him, Naruto finally stopped dodging and retaliated in kind. Clenched knuckles barreled straight through the metal of Raven's sword and shattered it like brittle glass, leaving her clenching the blade's ruined hilt. One of those flailing shards tumbled through the air to cut across her pale forehead, drawing a thin scarlet line across the length of her brow. In vain, she sought her scabbard to draw a new one, only to find herself grasping at empty air as he ripped it away from her with a roar. This close into her guard, Naruto had time enough to watch those bloody red eyes widen in surprise, to see full lips part into a small oval of confusion as he closed the distance. Then he was upon her, seizing the huntress by the shoulders to hold her fast as he drove his knee into her unprotected stomach. He was more than prepared for the brief resistance her aura gave. He tore right through it like a wet paper bag, and Raven folded over the blow with a soft squeak of surprise. Eyes bulging, she was still doubled over, still retching for air, when Naruto seized her by the hair and jerked her upright. Blue eyes met red as his forehead rang her skull like a gong. It rattled Raven's very world. The first punch had nearly burst her lungs, and the headbutt that followed actually knocked her out for a second. It was only through sheer willpower that Raven regained her consciousness and kept her footing when he let go of her. Even then, she was fairly certain he'd given her a concussion. It made her blood sing. He'd shattered Omen with a single punch and sent her scabbard flying across the room like a child's toy. She knew that she wouldn't be able to reach it without passing him. He did too. She couldn't see anger roaring in his eyes, but also focus. He wasn't about to let his guard down. "Good. Just stop." Her opponent spread his arms, waiting for her to rise, his body blurring as she struggled to her feet. "This isn't going to get you anywhere." She struggled upright, only to stumble down to a knee as her legs buckled. Strength was everything to her. She accepted that, just as she knew there would always be those stronger than her. Osmond was such a being. The one and only time she challenged him, she'd been soundly defeated. Not like this. This hurt. She felt like death warmed over. She felt fear, and yet that fear was tempered by excitement. This wasn't like one of her brawls with Crow or Taiyang. Not even Summer could push her this far. She hadn't been beaten this badly, been tested to this extent since she was a child. And yet he almost went to her when she fell, only narrowly managing catching himself at the last instant. Weakness, how she despised it. Just like the Schnee. "Are you done?" he asked. "Never." Her defiance angered him for some reason. She could see the spark of anger burn bright in his eyes again. Raven made a noise somewhere between a snarl and a shriek as she lurched at him anew. She lashed out with the ruined hilt of her sword, only to find her wrist caught in the unyielding grasp of a metal hand. That same arm wrenched her limb aside, twisting the muscles viciously. He hadn't even deigned to use a weapon. She realized somehow the thought burned even more. Was she not good enough to face his full strength? She'd seen that glowing form of his, that speed against the grim. This wasn't even a shadow of his earlier agility. She knew why. He was holding back. "Stop playing with me," she spat in his face. "Give me your all and give me nothing at all." "I'm not trying to kill you." His forehead jarred against hers, snarling just as hard. "Just try, you bastard." Those azure orbs narrowed in what might have been recognition or more anger. She couldn't be sure. Those fingers of cold steel continued to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. They kept squeezing her wrist even as as Omen's hilt tumbled from her grasp and clattered to the ground. Her arm wrenched to the right with an ominous creak, and her aura faltered her bones beginning to fracture. She struck out with her free hand, and he caught that one too, willingly grappling with her. Raven grit her teeth and refused to give him the satisfaction of crying out a second time. He wanted a contest of endurance. She'd give him one. Thus it came as quite the surprise when he swept her legs, tore his right arm free from hers, and slammed a vicious heel palm into her chin. Raven was fast, very fast. She was Huntress of 16 years, in peak physical condition, and the moment she realized she was exposed and without a weapon that she was going to get hit, she tried to dodge in the air even as she tumbled to the mat. It just wasn't enough. She failed to account for three things. First, the sheer force behind said punch. Second, her faulting aura levels. And third, Naruto. Sense reasserted itself at the last second, and the blonde wrenched his wrist aside, trying to turn what could have been a powerful uppercut into a rousing roundhouse instead. Unfortunately, in doing so, Raven accidentally swayed right into his fist, and her depleted aura failed to tank the hit. His fist barreled up into her chin and snapped her head into the mat. Raven's world went black as sweet slumber took her. Three hits. That was all it took to fell her. Through their entire exchange, she hadn't touched him, not once. It was galling, humiliating, amazing. An awful pang of silence fell over all those assembled as her body slumped bonelessly to the floor. Few saw the small, sleepy smile that wreathed her visage. She'd found someone to test herself against, someone capable of pushing her. She wasn't the only one to realize it. He'd gotten lucky this time, or so she told herself. She'd make him fight her again and again and again until she figured out just what it was that made him strong. He was a goal, someone to surpass. She passed out with that thought. Poor Birdie had no idea what she was getting into. Well, Ospen blinked. That happened. Summer didn't cackle, but she did giggle. Saw that coming. Come on, Raven. Ty sighed, stooping to retrieve her. Let's get you up. Shit, Crow groaned, but there was a smile tugging at his lips. She's gonna be pissed when she wakes up. Is she? Summer tilted her head. You don't understand women very well, do you, Stilts? Poor Crow. He really didn't. Naruto felt the slightest twinge of guilt as the rest of Team Stark gathered around their stunned comrade. Out of the corner of his eye, Nicholas flicked him a thumbs up and pointedly moved to intercept Ospen before the man could try and corner him again. Naruto nervously turned it as he felt Willow all but glide up to him and wrap an arm on his. Moments later, she laid her head to rest on his left shoulder. They stood like that for a few moments, leaning against one another in companionable silence. Thank you, she hummed at him. If you hadn't done that, I would have. Huh. Willow could have beaten Raven by herself. He'd have to spar with her again sometime soon. No ulterior motives there. Nope, certainly not. He caught the faintest smile from the corner of his eye and realized she was pleased with what he'd done, so much so that she let her mask slip for a moment. He liked seeing her smile. Without thinking, he tilted his head against hers. The Schnee stiffened, but made no effort to push him away. It felt nice after all that tension. Is she gonna be all right? Crow called to them. You really knocked her around back there? She'll be fine. Naruto rubbed his knuckles. I held back. It was nice meeting you, all of you, but I think it's time we were on our way. Wait. Summer blitzed him before he escaped. You have a scroll, right? Yes. Naruto's head nearly tilted horizontally in its confusion. Willow palmed her face. Summer, no, bad girl. Just put it out already. Against his better judgment, Naruto did as he'd been bade. Willow watched him all the while. The moment his hand cleared the pocket, Summer ripped the device from his hand and hurriedly inputted something into it. Her thumbs flying at a rapid pace across the screen. Several somethings by the looks of it. In a matter of moments, she shoved it back into his hand and bounced back half 2 paces. There, now you have our numbers. She beamed. All of ours. Willow frowned. Summer, it's not like that, the smaller girl wailed, clenching her fist. It's just, he beat Raven. The pair exchanged a glance, and, okay, I messed that up. Summer blew a stray strand of dark hair from her face. Let me start over. Steadying herself, she startled them both with a bow. I know this is going to sound weird, but thank you, Naruto. When she raised her gaze, her reply startled him as much as the stoic expression behind it. Where had that spastic ditz of a girl gone? For what you did, Riven needed someone to knock her off that high horse of hers. Maybe she'll get better once she wakes up, but if she gets out of hand like that again, you want me to knock her down a few pegs. He frowned. Please? Summer blinked suddenly, teary eyes at him. It'd mean the world to Team Stark. Good lord, you could weaponize that level of cuteness. Naruto folded before it like a house of cards. All right, I give. He flailed an arm up to hide his face. Just stop looking at me like that. It burns. Summer chirruped happily. I appreciate it. Make sure Willow keeps in touch. All right. Don't let her to be a stranger. Naruto squinted at her and found himself forced to reconsider his initial opinion. Perhaps she wasn't quite the terror he'd first thought her to be, happy, energetic, and obsessed with weapons, to be sure, but she seemed to genuinely care for the well-being of her teammates. He recognized that much, but there was still one thing he didn't understand: how Willow Schnee could have befriended someone like Summer Rose. There had to be a story there. Maybe he should ask. Sure, it was an interesting one. Willow squawked as she saw his expression, knew what he was about to ask, and she swiftly tugged him away, leaving now. Naruto rolled his eyes, but allowed her to tug him away all the same, like it or not. She'd grown on him more so than that bloody woman. Raven. He was already trying to forget the name. If he had things his way, he'd never see that wild woman again. Hopefully, he'd knocked some sense into her. The bulkhead delivered Naruto and Willow to the world below with all due speed, amongst other things. Land! Naruto cried as he flung himself from the craft, all but kissing the ground in his haste to escape. Never again, he croaked. I'm never flying again. There. Perhaps that was why Naruto looked so miserable when they first set foot in Mantle. Willow watched him like a hawk and massaged the small of his back as they disembarked the final few steps, ready to bolt the moment his neck bulged. She rather enjoyed him and his company, but she wasn't going to stand idly by if he blew chunks. She'd never live it down, not when she'd gone to the trouble of dragging him away from Summer. Still, it paid to be cautious. She didn't want him to dump his lunch on her skirt. A wise decision, for his face turned green not a moment later. He's never flown before. The realization startled Willow as she watched her supposed fiancé bolt to the nearest waste bin he could find. Of course he hasn't. She reprimanded herself. He wasn't from this world. Something told her they didn't have what Naruto called giant metal birds in his time. Era, what have you, bah. Thankfully, when Naruto returned, his face had regained some semblance of color once more. Feeling better, she ventured primarily as she offered him her arm. Blah, the blonde groaned. Kill me. If Naruto felt any shame for his earlier display or his actions up above, he did little to show it. Instead, he allowed her to lead him on, heedless of the looks they received. Of course, people would stare. It wasn't every day a member of Atlas came down to Mantle, much less a Schnee and her escort. Charade or not, she spread in the absence. She wasn't quite comfortable with calling him her fiancé, not yet. Word had begun to spread in the absence of jackets, and soon many might yet see the truth for themselves. But in the interim, the game continued. I'm glad we got out of there, Naruto said the word suddenly, drawing her up short. Raven was acting just like him. Who? Sasuke, he grumbled. She sounded like an old friend of mine. Back when he wasn't a friend, Willow let him talk. Naruto had his secrets he wouldn't give up without a fight. Even now, days after he'd landed here, he was still something of an enigma to her. She knew a little about him, his favorite colors, a bit about his personality and favorite foods, that he had a strong sense of right and wrong, but not his past. Not enough to truly understand him, at any rate. So that's why you were so riled up. She feigned a sigh once he'd finished. And here I thought you were fighting for my honor. Of course I'd fight for you, he grumbled under his breath. Willow turned beet red. Moving on. Mantle was as cold as it could have been given the season, but even the sparks heat offered by Atlas up above wasn't enough to banish the overcast skies today. Nor the nip in the air. She'd long since grown inured to it, but Naruto was another matter. Were it not for the thick blue coat he wore, she suspected his teeth would be chatting. They probably were even now. He was just too stubborn to let her see. Such a boy, he'd have to get used to it. The cold never bothered her anyway.
Achoo! A stray snowflake tickled Willow's nose to draw forth a dainty sneeze and a laugh from Naruto. Here, take my jacket, he offered. What? No, I'm fine. Really, it was just a sneeze. You don't have to. And by offer, that means he took the damn thing off and wrapped it around her shoulders before she could protest. Her traitorous cheeks betrayed her again. No, Bad Willow, no feelings. This was a business relationship to the letter. Personal feelings had no place here. Down, girl. Better? Better. She curled the fabric around herself. He still looked good in Schnee colors. A tiny traitorous part of her mind sulked. On that they agreed. White and blue suited him, more so without the coat. Oh, he'd tear himself out of the gaudy blue dress shirt she'd stuffed him in and find something else the first chance he got. But he was a fine sight for sore eyes at the moment. No matter how much he might abhor it, the blonde cleaned up rather nicely when pressed to it. More so with his hair gone nearly white now. Most might think him a Schnee already, if it weren't for his whiskered cheek or his brighter blue eyes. And if he minded the way she held onto his arm the entire way, he didn't protest at that. Willow took some quiet comfort in his warmth he provided as they made their way off the landing pad and into the city proper. Mantle rose all around them like a labyrinth maze to meet them, arms stretched wide as if the city were greeting an old friend. She couldn't say she was happy to see it again. This far from Atlas, the disparity was almost painful to behold. Ramshackle buildings and dilapidated shacks, up thrown together to form crude hotels, some even leaning against one another where the foundations had begun to crumble. Poor craftsmanship all around. Dark shapes shuffled in the alleyways, just out of sight. Beggars waited on nearly every corner. She hadn't been down here in years. Indeed, she wouldn't have come at all were it not for Naruto's request. This was important. This was necessary. She needed to remind herself just how fortunate she was, lest she lose herself in her own ego, lest she become someone like Raven. Nobody wanted to be like Raven. Hey, is that a Schnee? Her ears perked up, and someone murmured nearby. What's she doing down here? She could feel someone's eyes boring into her shoulders. Come to mingle with the common folk, has she? A man snarked and spat a waist behind her. Stuck up bitch. Naruto growled low and deep in his throat as they moved. Why are they doing this? You haven't done anything to these people, have you? No. Willow fixed her gaze on the street and hastened her pace. It's complicated. Just keep walking. You're the one who wanted to come down here, remember? I didn't know it was like this, he hissed. They're following us. Let them be, she whispered. It's not their fault. Assholes. His muted sigh stirred her. It wasn't their fault, she told herself as a passing fondness with the dog ears glowered at the two of them, nor that a man with scales peeled off from a stall to shadow their footsteps. None of these people were wholly to blame for their plight, and she felt no fear of them with Sable at her hip, nor Naruto by her side, nor did she hold any distaste for the common folk. They were, each of them, just trying to make a living on meager means, and her presence was drawing a crowd. This was a mistake, wasn't it? Well, would that she had the lien, she would gladly give it all to them. Didn't they know that? Even so, she was no stranger to their looks, sneers, nor jeers. They knew she was a Schnee after all. She made no effort to hide it. Her face gave it away, if not her coat in which she was now wrapped. She understood their anger, but she couldn't bring herself to accept it either. Why? The SEC had done no wrong to these people. Father's policies were fair and pushed for equality in pay and housing. He gave jobs to those who wished to work and didn't skimp on any safety measures that she knew of. She knew this. She'd seen it. Yes, the mines were dangerous, but they were trying to make them better. So why? Hey! Someone was brave enough to hurl a rock at her. Naruto started coming and nimbly plucked it out of the air before it could dash itself against her aura. A quick twist of his wrist sent it skittering back the way it came with an angry crack. Someone yelped. Anyone else want to try that? His voice boomed like a thunderclap as he rounded on the gathered crowd. Many of them shrank back when they saw his eyes. Of course they did. They weren't blue anymore, but a savage shade of slitted scarlet. He likely sensed the one responsible and thought to chase them down. She could see that a part of him clearly wanted to, just as she could feel his human hand twist in hers. No doubt he craved a quick and abrupt end to what he viewed as injustice. Attacking them couldn't be justice, it would be slaughter. Surely he wouldn't. His artificial arm snapped up and barked a dust round into the clouds, silencing them all. Look at you! The words struck like a whip as his gaze seared into them. This woman has done nothing to you. Nothing. What's your problem? She's a Schnee, one cried. And Naruto looked left, Naruto looked right. Naruto scowled. Has she hurt any of you directly? No. Is she directly responsible for your misfortune? I didn't think so. If you want to throw stones, by all means, go right ahead. He spread his arms and stepped before her, placing himself in the line of fire. Throw them at me, but I'm warning you. A lone finger rose to point at someone in the crowd, likely the perpetrator themselves. I'll throw them right back. No more stones were thrown. His lip curled in disgust. That's what I thought. A flash of gold was Willow's only warning before he ripped a pouch free from his belt. Do you see this? Naruto held the bundle of Lian high, one of many Nicholas has given him for all to see. There's more like this in it for you if you hear me out. Funny how easily jangle of coin could quiet a mob where words could not. Take your problems to Atlas, he said. I'll try my best to help anyone who needs it. If any of you actually want a fight today, well, Naruto didn't use his hands to make a seal. He simply grit his teeth and pulsed. With a hollow intake of air and smoke, more than 24 doppelgangers flooded the streets. Each spread their arms, forming a barricade between them and the masses. Naruto lazily slung the pouch of Lian over their heads, and all thoughts of anger and justice were all but forgotten in the chaos that followed. By then, it was all too easy to make their escape. Why reveal yourself like that? Willow hissed. You'll draw attention to yourself. What were you thinking? I wasn't, Naruto admitted readily, but it got their attention off of you. Mortified, she continued to tug him away with a wince. It wasn't enough. It never was. All the money in the world couldn't change the minds of the people. Some could never let go of their prejudice. Others delighted in stirred others up for their own means. If they wished to throw stones at her, so be it. But not the SDC, not Naruto. She would make things better, she swore, or die trying. Banishing such grim thoughts from her mind, she pulled Naruto towards a nearby stand. 2 meat buns, please. The owner of said stand, a faunus woman with gray hair and pocketed skin, looked upon her as one would a rotten carcass. She turned up her nose up and crossed both arms before her green apron. Don't want to serve a Schnee, she said. Willow's temper bristled, but she stomped it down. I see. Then we'll take our business else. Thunk. Naruto stepped forward and slammed his fist on the counter with an audible thud. Willow noticed the crack he'd left behind in the wood and chose not to speak of it. How about me, then? His smile had entirely too many teeth. I'm a paying customer. Will you serve me? Surely the woman must have seen the spark in his eye, for she immediately deferred to him. Maybe it was his whiskers, and she mistook him for Faunus. Aye, you're an odd one, but you're no Schnee. What'll it be? 2 meat buns. Naruto pointedly repeated her order. She wriggled her nose. Got the coin? Naruto slapped down another heavy pouch of Lian in response, one of the very same Willow had given him only days before. Sure enough, the woman stiffened and her eyes bulged, a spark of avarice burning bright behind those brown eyes. She reached a wriggling finger forward and pocketed it, as though expecting it to vanish at any moment. He pointedly pushed it at her. Keep the change. She had their meal ready in a matter of moments and looked all the more shamefaced for it. What's wrong with these people? He asked when they were some distance away. What do they have against you? I'll tell you later. Willow wilted. Willow bit back a sigh as she peeled back the wrapper on her own bun. Naruto didn't understand, of course he didn't. She did not have told him. He knew next to nothing of the faunus and their plight, nor the discrimination they faced. Discrimination some were beginning to return. She'd have to tell him soon, but for now, was it so wrong to savor the moment? Just a little. Careful, he warned. It's hot. I noticed. Willow shot him a sidelong glance as she puffed on the bun. Her breath turned to steam in the brisk air. I'm not a child, Naruto. She realized her mistake the moment the words left her mouth, but it was too late to take them back. You called your old man Daddy. Blast him. He had her there. She flailed frantically for an excuse. Don't you call your parents the same? Don't know. Gilded blue orbs blinked back at her. They've been dead for a while now. His words elicited a flinch. I'm sorry. That was uncouth of me. It's fine. He paused to tear a bite through his bun. They died right after I was born. A boyish grin plucked at his whiskered cheeks as he swallowed. But I got to see them again, so it's all good. I think Mom would have liked you. He scratched the whiskered cheek with one finger. That probably would have been over the moon. Willow squeaked. Why was he saying his parents would have approved of her? What do you mean you met them again? That's impossible, Naruto. The dead can't come back to life. I'll tell you about it someday, Naruto promised, and not a twinkle in his eye. Would he? Willow recalled Osmond's offer with a dreadful wince. Or you could tell me now. She crossed both arms before her bosom. Yikes, you're scary. Naruto's grin rather reminded her of a small child. Sure, why not? Well, I guess you could say. Something slammed into him from behind, eliciting an annoyed grunt from the whiskered warrior. Willow followed his gaze, and her heart stomped. There was a knife in his leg. Naruto? It's fine, don't worry about it. Much to her surprise, the blonde merely rolled his eyes and reached around to pull it free. He'd been looking up when he should have looked down. Unfortunately, in doing so, the half-eaten meat bun slipped from his grasp. Someone leaped to grab it with a desperate cry, landed in an awkward tumble, and sprinted away. I've got them. Willow drew Sable and flicked a glyph after the fleeing urchin to slow them before they could dart around a corner and escape. Naruto pounced like a panther even as her semblance faded. They never stood a chance. He caught their assailant in mid-leap with a flying tackle and bore them to the ground with his artificial arm. With the other, he reached for his stolen meal. Ow! He recoiled with a hiss. She bit me! She? I didn't do anything. A thin, reedy voice wailed beneath the blonde. Let me go. You stabbed me. Naruto climbed to his feet, dragging his would-be killer up after him. Poorly at that, but the fact still stands. I just wanted your food, fool. They snapped back. Hand it over. I don't think you're in any position to make demands. It was with a certain level of incredulity that Willow watched the two of them. Well, less watch in Naruto's case, more pulling. He frowned at the slip of the girl who had the audacity to shank him. She hadn't done a very good job. Even now, she fell in his grasp like a little hellcat, trying to claw his eyes out. She was dirty, filthy, wrapped in rags, her dark hair a ratty mess, and she'd still tried to mug him over a bit of food. He wasn't sure if he should be impressed or furious. God, she was just a kid. She couldn't be more than 8, 9 at the most, and she'd stabbed him. His mind was having trouble reconciling that one. Bah, you let her do it, Kurama sniped. You're a softy like that. He had sensed something, but he hadn't thought anyone would be foolish enough to attack him, so he'd let it happen. Clicking his tongue, he plucked the knife out of his thigh, a glass dagger. Crude and fragile, it crumbled away in his hand even as he held it. His wound wasn't a deep one by any means, more of an awkward gouge. The weapon itself, little more than a sliver of unusual make. Was this what Willow called the semblance? Frowning, he returned his attention to the little waif before him and plucked her up by the scruff of her neck. She tried to bite him. Points for spirit, if nothing else. He liked to think he hadn't fallen so far as her children yet. Still, he gave her a light shake when she tried to nip him again. Spunk was all well and good, but he wasn't fixing to be someone's chew toy. What's your name, runt? Amber eyes blazed back at him, wild and feral. Why should I tell you? Willow. Bun, please. She provided hers, and he held up the meat bun to the urchin. There's food in it for you. A name's all I need. Amber eyes lit up as life returned to them. There could be no missing the telltale shiver that shot down her spine as she waved the morsel before her face. She took her lower lip between her teeth and seemed to weigh his words for a moment. Poor thing, she looked so small, so cold. Maybe he should give her his jacket, even if it was too large for her. Damn it, he didn't know what to do. Willow looked just as conflicted, though for different reasons he didn't understand. There was no help to be had there when he met her gaze. In the end, however, the girl gave him her name, Cinder. Naruto rolled the name on his tongue, considering it for a long moment. Cinder. Why did that name sound so familiar? Had he heard it somewhere before? Nah, probably wasn't anyone important. What harm was there in giving her a bit of food? He could always buy more. This girl looked like she hadn't eaten in a week. Maybe more. Here you go. He set her down and tossed her the bun. You've earned it. She snatched it from his grasp and downed it in 3 bites. Amber eyes rose expectantly to meet his again. Naruto shrugged helplessly, breath steaming in the frigid air. Sorry, that was all I had. I'm still hungry. It was a whine. Willow groaned behind him. You cannot be serious. Amber Eyes snapped at her. Wasn't talking to you. Go away. Naruto nearly staggered backwards even as Willow made angry Willow noises. Erk, he'd just taken critical damage. This one was worse than Summer, much worse. If she had learned to weaponize cuteness, then this one had turned Shirley Defiance and pouting into a walking nuke. Besides, she was so small, so tiny. How could you ignore someone like this? That would akin to kicking a kitten. No one kicked a kitten. Worse, he could tell she wasn't faking any of what she just said. Children were easy to read, this one more than most. There was no deceit here, no deception, no grand plan to make him lower his guard, so she could slip in and slice his throat in the bed in the dead of night. All he felt from her was hunger, not just for food, but for life itself. She had a spiteful ambition not only to survive, but to live. It was that same ambition that led her to try and knife him over a bit of food, even if she failed. What do you want me to do? Steal some? He laughed. Yes, you're strong, she said without a glimmer of hesitation. Steal some more. See, it sounded so different when she said it. Raven made it sound wrong somehow. When this girl said it, her words seemed more of a statement. She knew he could, but that didn't mean he would. He wasn't going to go back and box that honest lady around the ears just to make a point. But he wasn't about to leave a child out here in the cold either. Again, why? He challenged. She squirmed in place. Because I'm still hungry. Where are your parents? Surely she had some. She had to. He didn't want to consider the alternative. Don't got none. She growled at him. In her rough accent. Her eyes widened, suddenly concerned. You gonna kill me? No, never. She had fire. So much fire. Could he really turn his back on her here? Atlas' cold mantle even more so. She'd freeze to death. It was a miracle she hadn't done so already. Something twitched in his heart. An orphan out here in the freezing cold, stabbing people and stealing scraps to help to survive. That was rather ghastly now that he thought about it. Still, he knew what it was to have no one. He'd been there before, and while he hadn't been forced to steal scraps from the streets in his apartment, there had been a time long ago where he'd come close, very close. He didn't have any more money on him now, but he had something else. Don't you do it. He made a snap decision, and Kurama swore at it. I'ma do it. Quick as a flash, Naruto reached down and swept little Cinder from her feet. She was light, almost frightfully so. It only further reinforced his belief that this was the right thing to do. Of course, she flailed wildly in his arms, scratching and clawing at him, no doubt thinking that he meant to do her harm. Her struggles ceased as he swung her up into his shoulders. Her hands flailed again, but this time for purchase. His thin arms looped around his neck and held on for dear life as he tactfully supported her by her little legs. Right, that does it. You're adopted. Cinder absolutely squeaked. Wait, what? Willow made a choking sound. I beg your pardon. As she looked on, the blonde grunted and tucked little Cinder closer to his back. For some reason, the urchin didn't resist. It wasn't that she couldn't, she was simply unable to. She looked just as stunned as Willow felt, her golden eyes wide, mouth slack even as she clung onto his shoulders. Poor girl, he'd broken her with those words. Wait, were those tears in her eyes? Did I stutter? A blue eye peeked over his shoulders. I'm adopting her. You can't be serious. She tried to kill you. You're not going to budge on this, are you? Naruto sauntered on ahead with a jaunty whistle that sounded entirely too cheery for her liking. Nope. Previews. Aura-based storage scrolls. What practically foamed at the mouth. That's brilliant. This will change the world. Little Cinder tore into the food before her as though it was her last meal. Naruto blew out a breath and watched from his perch. Adopting a kid. What the hell had he been thinking? He didn't know the first thing about raising a kid. Did he regret it? Not at all. More. Willow arched an eyebrow. May I have a word, please? Cinder squirmed in her seat, then considered again. Mommy? Willow felt her face turn incandescent as Naruto tumbled out of the window with a startled squawk. Critical damage! He didn't trust himself, so he swarmed them with clones. Thus, the brawl, mugging, or whatever the devil it was, ended in moments. Caught unprepared by the sudden onslaught, the man's attackers were quickly overwhelmed. One turned to flee, and one clone launched another to him like a missile, tackling him to the floor. Naruto blinked, surprised at the ingenuity. He tried to better himself since he came to this world, and it seemed his clones had taken that lesson to heart. In the end, it's about trust, he said. I didn't get your name. James. His ally extended an arm. James Ironwood, thanks for the assist. Don't mention it. Not to show without thinking. Morphle he. The man had a grip just like his name. That trick you did with the clones. The general frowned. Just how many can you make? Alas, Nat didn't even pause to consider his answer. I don't know. Hundreds, thousands. Never really tested my limits. James choked. His mind already whirled at the implications. If what he said was true, this individual was a one-man army. Atlas needed this. I demand a rematch. No. How many times do I have to tell you to go away? They shouldn't do that. Naruto shook his head. People are people. Faunus have rights too. Nicholas beamed at the boy. Well said. Now what are you going to do about it? His prodigy blinked, frowned, smirked. I have an idea. He made a fool of me, made me the laughing stock of Atlas. I'll do anything, Jackass gasped, reaching out a hand towards the shadowy figure as he knelt. Anything. Hand over the girl, and you won't be harmed. Nope. Naruto scoffed. Nope, 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 not doing that. Lots of nope. Summer poked her head over her ally's shoulder and blew a raspberry. Nah. As she looked on, the blonde bared his teeth in a smile that had entirely too many teeth for her liking. For a moment, an instant, a heartbeat, his body seemed to flicker with golden light. There was a high, wild light to his eyes, turning them scarlet in the dim light. He took on a low stance and whipped his human arm outwards. A knife slapped home from the sheath hidden in his wrist and landed in a waiting palm. He held it for a brief moment, then flicked it almost lazily at their attacker. Unfortunate. The hooded man caught it and spoke in a voice like gravel. No one had to die here today. You're right. Naruto sighed, raising one hand in a seal. They didn't, nor will they. The kunai's hidden explosive tag went off with a roar in the man's palm. In the chaos, Naruto grabbed Summer and bolted. End of chapter 3.